Hello and welcome to Console Shock, Retro and Modern Gaming Chat with me, Trev and Stu. All right, Stu.
How you doing, Trev? How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Thank you very much. How are you going at the moment?
Oh, mate, I've been busy out there voting for the London Mayor.
Oh, God, that's today, isn't it? Yeah, I completely forgot.
Have you not done it, Trev? Have you not gone out and voted?
No, voting's too woke now, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, voting's too woke. Yeah, that's
voting's too woke. Chocolate is too woke. Some forms of, I don't know, basket weaving is too woke. It's just everything's too woke now. Would you agree, Stu?
100%. I even think eggs are too woke.
Yeah, sometimes you just look at them, don't you, and you think, look how woke that is now.
Oh, so, yeah. I think what we're going on about.
I forgot. I forgot that it was happening tonight. So yeah. But you've done it, right?
I have voted, but I did forget until I walked past it on the way home. I was like, I've got to go and do that. So,
nice one.
If I hadn't walked past it on the way home from work, I probably would have got home and not actually voted. To be fair.
You would have forgotten that shit. But did you have some ID with you? You can't just rock into these things, can you?
I don't think
your ID.
I had my driving license on me, but so I showed that. But yeah, you might. Well, I'm assuming you need ID, but I always have my driving license on me. So I
think you need something. Yeah,
you must do. You don't want a situation like they had in America where all the votes were stolen from Trump when he actually won the election. You don't want that to happen here.
Not really, no. And it's something that might happen with a London Mayor.
That last thing was a joke, guys. That was a joke.
He says.
Yeah.
But I don't think. People tend to listen to our podcast to talk about, voting and all that sort of unimportant stuff. We talk about real life, things that really affect people's lives and their day to day. Something that really sort of feeds into things like the cost of living crisis and how am I going to feed my kids and how am I going to get paid to get to work? How am I going to pay the heating bill? And that, of course, is video games.
Exactly.
I think kind of trumps all of those things that I just mentioned. Trump. So that's what we're going to talk about. Maybe we'll do some voting later on for any of those who've forgotten to do their local elections.
Let's do a little bit of voting, because obviously we've got a main subject, but sort of what I want to bring up first, Trev, I've got some bad news.
Yes.
And you can see it in the private chat what I've put on there. But
he's put some awful stuff in the private chat, by the way, guys. You can't see some of this stuff.
I don't
know if I want to talk about some of this stuff, to be honest. It's pretty
it's going to get talked about. So anyway, moving on to my or a subject that I want to talk about, or I want to moan about, is everyone probably knows a few months ago I brought myself a computer, an old Windows XP computer, and I was having lots of fun with it. And then I was trying to upgrade the processor. And eventually I went to this shop and the guy over there was really helpful. He said, what you need to do is update the BIOS. So I went home, I downloaded some bits, I did this, I did that. And then I updated the BIOS, or what I thought I updated the BIOS. And now the computer doesn't turn on. It won't get past the starting bit. So the retro £20 XP computer I bought and had lots of fun over it for about 3 months. I've now, as far as I know, I've completely messed it up. So if anyone out there, wants to help me, please reach out. I've annoyed myself.
Does it post? Does it post?
It comes up with press F1 press F1 or F2, and it says CMOS checksum bad, and it's got a new CMOS battery in there. So honestly, I really don't know what I can do, and I'm sure if I went somewhere and I took it somewhere and I spent more and more money on it, someone could get it working.
Well, CMOS checksum bad is often happens when the CMOS battery's dead. So maybe try another battery.
I have put new ones in there.
Try another one just in case. You never know.
Yeah. I'll give it a go. But anyway, my computer is, but actually my main computer, which I play all my latest games.
What were you playing on it last?
I was actually playing, and I was really enjoying it, actually, the original Call of Duty.
Oh man!
And it's quite funny when you play it, you see so much sort of DNA that's transferred all the way through the games, and now.
Or with you being, part Northern Irish, you would say Call of Jetty. I would assume is how you would pronounce it. Is that correct?
How would I pronounce it if I was from South Africa?
Call of Duty probably is how you would do it. Apologies to any Northern Irish people and South African people.
I think honestly, Trev, the two accents you can do are absolutely spot on.
Can't do any others, so don't get don't get too excited. But
can you not do Scottish? Yeah. You went to Scotland last week.
No, I can't.
No,
I can't. No.
Call of Duty. Call of Duty over the glen. No.
That kind of sounds like Northern Irish still, but
maybe. Maybe.
I've got a tip for you though. Don't walk around Glasgow wearing any kind of sports thing, because I had about 4 people come up to me asking for directions, and I don't know why. I think I just stuck out because I had like football stuff on. You had
all your Celtic gear on, didn't you?
You know what? For the most part, I just had a baseball cap that had a Celtic badge on it. The other gear, I had a coat on most of the time. And I had a tourist guy come up to me and ask me how to get to the Celtic ground, which I was just about able to tell them how to do that. I had a random bloke just asking me for directions, a Scottish guy that I could barely understand. And he had a go at me because I had a Celtic cap, but I had a blue jumper on that he could see. So he thought, is that a Rangers jumper you've got on with a Celtic? I'm like, no, it's a New York Giants jumper. And he was like, I don't know about NFL. I was like, okay. So that was a fun interaction.
I had a bit of a funny situation when I got to Glasgow, probably about 2-3 years ago. I parked my car and I thought, I need to get to Ibrox. So if everyone knows, Trevor is a big Celtic fan. I am a big Rangers fan. So I said, I need to get a taxi to get to Ibrox. And then so I hailed a taxi. I jumped in there and I said, can you take me to Ibrox? And the taxi driver said with a straight face, is there a game on today? And he completely I thought, oh good, yeah, I hope so. I've got a ticket for it. And he goes, okay, all right. And then of course there was a game on. And I got chatting to him.
He was pulling your leg.
He was this diehard Celtic fan. And I sort of went down the line of, oh God, I might be in a sticky situation here. So I said, no, I love going to football games all around the country. So Rangers were playing at home today. I was only here for one day. So I got a ticket for Rangers.
You're lucky he didn't send you to take you to, I don't know, something crazy like St Mirren.
Well, they were playing St Mirren.
Oh, wow. It's a local derby then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it was a good old atmosphere. Really enjoyed it.
The funny thing is, so I went to a guy. I was in Scotland, as I've just talked about. I did go to a football match. It was actually at Hampden Park. The funniest thing about it was I couldn't. It was the most amount of people at a football match that were all eating the same thing. It was incredible. But it was like half time. Well, it was actually throughout the game, really, but mainly at half time. We were just sort of looking at everybody around us because it's just, this is our half time, nothing to do. They were all eating Scotch pies. There wasn't really hot dogs or chips or any other kind of other rando burgers and stuff that perhaps you'd have because Charlton, my team, that's what I would see when people eat stuff. They were all eating Scotch pies.
I think there's.
I never tried one. I would like to try one. They don't
I think there's a slightly different Scottish football culture than English football culture. And it's they seem to have a lot more sort of pyro. They seem to have a lot more sort of areas for ultras, and it's all about the pies, and the pies always seem to be made by a local butcher. of some sort. So there seems to be a lot more.
And it was all there was tons of guys smoking in the toilets at half time. Like there's about 12 guys just in there. You are not allowed to. There was announcements throughout the whole game saying you're not allowed to smoke, like graphics on the big screens and everything. They're all just smoking. A guy was smoking a fag at his seat, which annoyed the woman next to him who had a go at him. So he just went to the back and just carried on in a row of seats at the back. No one tried to kick him out or do anything. And this, by the way, this is a women's football game, not your classic, men's game where there's a bunch of grouchy, middle-aged, overweight, diabetic men that are going to be like, screw you guys, I do what I want. It's just like, a women's football game. It was Rangers v Celtic, so maybe that had an extra edge to it. But yeah, I found that just some differences that I'd noticed. I would like to go to a St Mirren or a Partick Thistle, but that'll be next time I go up there. Yeah.
I think the thing that I sort of noticed was when I went to the Rangers game, I was sort of sitting in the stands, and then the guy next to me, he sort of kept on bringing out of it, underneath his coat, he had like a slim bottle of Buckfast, and he kept on having sort of swigs of this bottle of Buckfast, then putting it back into his inside pocket, and I thought, oh, that's you're in Glasgow when the guy next to you in the stadium is drinking Buckfast out of a little bottle. I thought that's gold.
Yeah, they're gonna bring all of that wonderful stuff to Euro 2024. Hopefully they'll get out the group, something they've never achieved in international football. So.
I'd love to see Scotland have a nice little run.
Yeah, I'm not like a lot of English people who get super crazy tribal about when it comes to international football. I'm not like I'm England, so I hate Wales and I hate Scotland and I hate Northern Ireland. I hate Ireland. Probably comes from a place with me personally where I'm half Irish. So I kind of like to see Republic of Ireland do well, and obviously I'm born in England, so I support England as well. So I never really had an us and them. I always had a bit of a split kind of loyalty thing going on. Obviously, when England play Scotland, and I want England to beat them and everything, but outside of that, I'm happy when they beat other teams and qualify for things and. Same for Wales, same for, even like Northern Ireland and obviously Republic of Ireland. So, yeah, I'm not quite like some people might be absolutely disgusted by that. If you're a super dyed-in-the-wall, I support my team and hate everybody else type dude.
I think realistically, I totally agree with you. I'd like to see, the four home nations and the Republic of Ireland all get into sort of the next Euros, the next World Cup. That'll be, the best scenario. And... a few years ago, Wales had a cracking run. I think got to the semi-final of the Euros, and did extremely well.
Yeah, and obviously this time around we've got England and Scotland basically, and I hope obviously it'd be amazing if somehow that was the final. I don't think either team is going to get to the final, but it'd be good, for England to have a good run, and hopefully Scotland. I think it'd be great if they were able to get out of the group and sort of get that. Monkey off their back of never having got through a group stage, and they've got a good shot. I mean, they've got Germany in their group, and so that I can't imagine they'll win that game. But in fact, who else have they got in their group?
You got to think that
there we go. Switzerland and Hungary. Switzerland, Hungary, and Germany. So I think they've got a chance. Probably the Germany
they could get 6 points there. They could get 6 points.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah. I think if they can, if I was Steve Clark, the manager, I would probably say, well, Germany, I could probably afford to lose that game, but I might even sneak a draw because Germany aren't at their best at the moment. And you could probably win. You could probably get at least 4 points. I would say for Scotland, they could either beat one of Scotland, one of Switzerland or Hungary, and draw against the other, and that would be 4 points. But I think they could probably get 6 points. Like they could probably beat either of them, or both. And 6 points should be enough. 4 should be enough though. I think
realistically,
the top two go through. Yeah,
I think the top two and a few other teams as well.
Place.
They've got quite a lot of opportunities. But sort of what I want to talk about, because I'm sure people are here for the video games, is there's been a lot in the news recently, or the video game news, about AAA games sort of not making money, and I sort of wanted to sort of briefly talk about that. And
I didn't know Triple H made video games. I thought he was a wrestler.
they're all wrestling games. But you seem to, I remember back in the day, it was like there was loads of AAA games that came out, and now AAA games sort of come out. When I mean sort of AAA, it comes from the sort of the term for, something's AAA, it's really safe, it's going to be successful. And that's not necessarily the case now, because you've had lots of games come out recently. What was it? Skull and Bones, which has sort of lost money, and a few other sort of games sort of come to mind that have come out recently.
Lots of live service games.
Live service games and things like that. And the actual games that are making money are more sort of the indie games, or the ones from a smaller developer. And when they come out, and I think someone made a really good point, I think it's a channel called Going Indie, is when you make a game that's designed for everyone to play, everyone to enjoy, no one enjoys it. But if you make a game that's designed for, this person likes, I don't know, space trading games with, I don't know, Souls-like mechanics, and if people like that, they'll love it, and it'll do well with those type of people. And it's just sort of really interesting, really, about how people are getting more into sort of their little niches of games, and sort of moving away from, the big sort of bubblegum sort of generic games that are meant to please everyone.
Yeah, the sort of 100 million hour massive free, RPG, or Souls-like game, or like, Call of Duty and stuff. They kind of keep on going regardless, don't they? But those big games just cost too much to make. I think that's the main issue. They're too expensive. They need too much staff. You have to be a mega giant corporation to be able to do them. And there's only so many of those companies that can exist realistically. So you're going to get, a lot of indie companies. And a lot of people don't want to make another company's game. So they have an indie studio. And a lot of the games I've been playing, I play a mixture, I guess, personally.
I think I do as well,
Yeah, I'll play the odd other sort of AAA. I'm playing Control at the moment, which is a few years old now, but that's sort of a AAA game by the guys that do Alan Wake and Quantum Break and all that. That's a really good. I'm really enjoying that. Remedy, yeah, that's it. That's a really good game. I'm near the end of it now, but it's a really good game. I've really been enjoying that. It's a AAA game. But I've got other games like recently we're playing. Everyone knows I'm a big fan of Contra. Contra Operation Galuga, which is like a new Contra game that's basically just like the old school games. It's like a 2D. Obviously, all the characters are 3D and it's 3D models, but it's on a 2D plane like the original Contra games on 8 and 16-bit. And that's a great little game. Turtles Mutant Shredder's Revenge. Sorry, Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge is an old school beat 'em up game. And I've really been enjoying that. It's only about 5 hours long, but it's really good fun. And there's plenty of room. I find it easy to play some of those games sometimes. You can kind of play 5 or 6 in one sitting and sort of jump between them. Whereas a AAA game, you kind of have to, really sit down and, watch the cut scenes and, remember the huge amounts of different controls and remember the storyline and what you had to do last time you saved. Which is, it's fine. We can do that, but sometimes you don't want to do that, do you? You just want to play.
I played Starfield, and I finished Starfield, and I have to admit I enjoyed it. There was a hell of a lot of loading between doors and things, which felt quite out of place on a game in 2023. I guess that came out in. So from my point of view, that was a great game. But I think if, let's say in a year's time, I go back to that game when some DLC pack comes out, so I thought, well, I had a good experience, I want to play that again. It's going to be. There were so many little nuances of, how do you do that? Where do you go to buy that? How do you sell this? How do you manage that menu? And there were so many things that I didn't even get close to understanding, like huge amounts of mechanics on how to build bases, how to, mine stuff on planets and convert them into XP and do this. And
it's not a casual game.
No, there was a hell of a lot to it, and I feel like I'm sort of moaning that there's, they're giving you so much game for your money, which that's a good thing. That's a great thing. They're giving you lots of game for your money, but then a point I was going to make is that a lot of people online have been talking about the new, I think, Star Wars Jedi Outlaws and the Ubisoft game, and that's coming out, and it's going to be something like £69 to get the standard edition, £100 to get the pre-order, where you get a free skin or a free this, and you get to play it 3 days earlier, or there's £140 or £130 edition. Now, I don't want to say, but for £140. You could get Xbox Gold or Xbox Game Pass membership for the whole year, or you could go onto Steam and buy maybe 20 or 30, indie games, which you're bound to like sort of maybe half of them. So it just seems, that pricing to me seems absolutely ridiculous.
I don't buy any of those extra things. I'll get them in if I get a Game of the Year version of a game, then I'll get some of that stuff thrown in, but that's a year down the line or a couple of years down the line. I've never really paid for any of that extra stuff. I very rarely buy a game on day one generally. Probably the only things that are brand new that I've played straight away when they've come out are things that have gone on Game Pass straight away. I can't remember the last time I dropped. Well, there's actually some Switch games I do. It's the only console that I say I would buy games new for. Would be the Switch. Like I've got Super Mario Wonder and some of the recent sort of Switch games, Mortal Kombat 1.
But Super Mario Wonder was £40.
Yeah, exactly. There's no...
And that seems like,
nothing like
a bargain.
That. Yeah, and it is. I played through it and I managed to complete it. It was really enjoyable. Switch. I have bought new games, but to be honest, that's a good example with Mario. They never really go on sale, so you kind of you pay £40 now, and that's basically what it'll be. Zelda Breath of the Wild, a Switch launch game. I think it's still like £40-50 to buy a copy. Which is kind of insane, really, but that's just how Nintendo games work, really. But if I'm playing anything that isn't Nintendo, it'll probably be on my Steam Deck or my Legion Go, and that'll probably be from a sale that I would have bought it. It's just a lot of gamers, and they don't want to pay it. And a lot of those AAA games, they've got. They do sell their millions, but they've got a limited appeal at the same time because they ask so much and need so much time. If I see a game takes 100 hours to complete, I'm not really that interested in it because I don't want to play. I could play 10 indie games in that amount of time and have loads of different experiences probably for less money, than I would. There's the odd game that I would invest that much time in. But it has to really be something that would jump out at me, and not many games. They're all so similar now. I know. Well, I'm not really into Souls-like games, so I'm not going to be into that. Whatever one that's coming out that's like that. RPGs, I can take or leave them. There's so many of them. They just that appeal isn't really there for me, unfortunately. But probably for a lot of people, I would say.
Yeah, Trev, I totally agree with you, and I've got to, and I'm more in I'm still in a sort of exploring sort of phase of, coming back to the PC and, buying lots of games on Steam, which are, quite inexpensive, and I have got plans to get a new XP computer or get the other one repaired, but I'll go back and, there's so many games that I missed over the years that will play on my modern gaming PC, on my Steam Tech, and actually, the biggest bargain I've had this year is going back and rebuying Grand Theft Auto 4 and playing that on the Steam Deck, and I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through, and it's just quite nice. Just go to bed in the evening, do a couple of missions on there, and it's just you wouldn't think that was a game that came out 15 plus years ago, because the storytelling. Yeah. The only thing that really sort of tells me that it's a game from 15 years ago is when you fail a mission, you've got to sort of start it all again, from back at the going to the start point and going through the cutscenes and things like that, which you can jump through. And I can't imagine in the next Grand Theft Auto they'll have some sort of you failed at the third part of the mission, you'll start the third part of the mission again. But I'm really enjoying sort of Grand Theft Auto 4. It's great on the Steam Deck, and really enjoying it. Actually, one game, talking about I'm just bringing up my library on I don't know if you've heard of this, Trev, but it's called CDi Rally, and it's sort of a love letter to Sega Rally. So I bought this, and so if you search it out, or search it out on YouTube, or anyone else search out on YouTube, CDi Rally Championships, and it's a basically it's like not a clone or sort of a remake or a imagined Sega Rally sort of inspired game, and it looks really good. It looks really good, but the handling doesn't quite feel like sort of Sega Rally. I find myself hitting the side and spinning around and facing the wrong way, and then having absolutely no chance. So it's still a sort of a bit of a work in progress. And but they've just done an update on April the 17th, so I'm gonna give it another sort of go.
Let's have a look at that.
Yeah, and I'd highly recommend sort of picking it up and having a look at that, and that's to anyone else out there as well. So so just on an update on the 17th of April, it says performance tweaks, bug fixes, something about AI cars smashing into you and things. So give that one a go.
Easy right, maybe. An easy left, maybe. Does it do all that?
I think it has got a little bit of that. Yeah, it's got a bit of that in there, and there's sort of a great big sort of sandbox sort of world with the great big jumps in, so you can do like the levels like the old game, and then you can go into a sandbox world and just sort of drive around this great big sort of, I guess, sort of this lot of grassy area with cliffs and beaches and great big jumps, and that was quite good fun. But yeah, I'd recommend anyone sort of give that one sort of a go as well. But if they get the chance,
that's a very good segue for us. Actually,
it is actually
about Sega Rally, which is something that appeared on a couple of consoles that didn't, fulfill their full potential. I would say that's kind of what we want to talk about now, because we have covered some of these systems individually over the years of doing Console Shock. But I think it'd be interesting to have a discussion about the pros and cons of so-called failed consoles, and ones that we think actually have a lot of merit. Perhaps you might think, which ones out of those failed consoles are worth collecting, which ones aren't, which ones are genuinely deserve to be failures and are bad, or which ones are kind of actually have a good library of games and are actually worth getting or collecting for, or just trying out in an emulator. And you can kind of go really crazy with this and include, there's been tons of failed consoles. You can go really obscure to things like, the Casio Loopy, or the Hyperscan, or the FM Towns Marty and the Apple Pippin. We're not really going to go that far. We're just going to discuss like a handful that we've kind of got personal experience with. Again, some of these we've already covered, some quite recently. But like for you, Stu, is there a particular console or
well, I remember
you like?
At one point, yeah. So there seemed to be at one point, maybe in 1993, 94, I can get a bit confused with all the dates now. I'm getting older, but there seemed to be like every month there was a new games console coming out or a new accessory for a games console to give it an advanced feature. But I'll put a little list of the ones I've got in mind. Yes. So I think first off is the Atari Jaguar, and that came out with the mantra of it's 64-bit, and that was, oh wow, it's going to be twice as good as a 32-bit machine. It's 64-bit, and but then obviously bits don't quite relate back to actually how much power a machine has got, and for me, I mean, I had a Jaguar, but it wasn't great. It wasn't very good. Trev, did you ever have one?
I never had one. It is a good one. It's kind of we can sort of discuss in terms of its quality. I mean, it's a failed console, but I would say it's worth investigating. Some of these are quite expensive now, we should say, to collect for.
Yeah, 100%.
Kind of. Yeah, the Jaguar is probably one of them. Actually,
I think Jaguar's got quite a good. I want to say EverDrive, but sort of multi-cart sort of features.
Yeah, I think it has.
So you can play.
Pretty much all of them have an option for these now. Yeah,
exactly. So you can play games that way, and for me, the Jag. The Jag was all on cartridges. And you could see every, bad influence. All the magazines were talking CDs, and this was like, oh well, it's on cartridges, and I remember being quite impressed with it at the time. It certainly looked better than things like the Mega CD, obviously the Mega Drive, the Super Nintendo, but then. Even when I was sort of that age, it was a little bit lacking in what I would call the quality games.
Yeah, you'd probably say that the best games. I think Doom is obviously a big one. It had a really good version of Doom, one of the better versions on a console. It might have been worth just having one for that game alone at that point in time. Tempest 2000 is another one, like sort of a shooter where you're sort of rotating around kind of a sort of a dial-shaped plane, which is actually a really good game as well. And Alien versus Predator, which was an FPS, much like Doom, from the Alien and Predator film sort of universe. Probably the first really good example of an Alien versus Predator game. There's been a whole bunch of them since, and I think there was before as well. But a really good example of a licensed first-person shooter based on a movie sort of series, and so yeah, I mean, I would say it's a decent console. I never owned one. It's something that I wanted to do. I have played some of the games on emulators. I mean, a lot of its library were sort of Amiga ports and Mega Drive ports, things like Zool 2 and stuff.
Exactly,
cannon fodder. Yeah,
things like I've got the list in front of me. You can probably see me like things like Syndicate.
Sensible Soccer and
Sensible Soccer, NBA Jam. So it was lots of things that came out on other systems. So I think some of the better games were.
There wasn't a big leap, and there wasn't a lot that you were just, a lot of that stuff you can get on your Mega Drive, so for a lot cheaper, and it's without having to pay for a new console. So, yeah, you'd be thinking like, what is the value there? But it's probably in the middle a little bit for me. I mean, its library is decent, but there's probably only really 2 or 3 outstanding games. Probably Tempest 2000 is the one that you'd say this is the Jaguar kind of cornerstone sort of game. There was things like Cybermorph as well, which are kind of cool to investigate because check out some of those exclusives. Tempest 2000, I think that actually did get ported to like the PS1 and the Saturn a couple of years later. There's things like Iron Soldier, Cybermorph, Alien versus Predator. I think it's worth investigating those, but I think it's a little bit further down the scale. And talking to those other sort of 1993, 94 pre sort of PlayStation era stuff, and then you've got something like the 3DO, which I think is better than the Atari Jaguar. What are your sort of thoughts on that?
100%. I mean, when the 3DO came out, it had such better support. Obviously, Trick Hawkins was the guy behind it. Old Tricky Hawkins.
Yes,
was the guy behind it. So, and all of the EA franchises, things like FIFA, Need for Speed, Road Rash, and you know, when you see something like Need for Speed on the 3DO, you think, hold on, this is the next generation of gaming. You know, the Jaguar is just a Mega Drive game with more colours, with a little bit of 3D over here. On the 3DO, you know, the games looked, you know, leaps and bounds better, in my opinion. I don't know what you think about that, Trev.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was lots of, you know, the Jaguar could do 3D, but it would struggle with really good sort of 3D, like texture map stuff. A lot of the 3D that you think of with the Jaguar is actually a lot of flat shaded polygonal things, you know, like you might get on like a Mega Drive, really, or an Amiga. Obviously, it could do it a bit better than those could, but even so, like the 3DO looked a lot closer to what we would later get on like the Saturn and the PlayStation. But, you know, you've got games like, you know, there was a great version of Road Rash, which is brilliant. You've got Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which is probably the best version of Street Fighter 2 you could get up to that point. Before you kind of got like, you know, Street Fighter Alpha on the Saturn and the PlayStation and things like that in a couple of years after that. The first Need for Speed game is pretty good on there. It's all quite enjoyable to this day. You've even got things like Wolfenstein 3D, got a really good port. Not very good version of Doom, unfortunately, but lots of exclusive games as well, which are really enjoyable. You've got like... I was
going to mention Gex.
Oh,
that was an early game. Burning, what's it called? I've got it here. Burning Soldier, and that was a good game at the time, if I remember correctly. There was just a lot more sort of going on with it, and then actually going back to the Atari Jaguar, that did have a sort of a bit of a last minute, you know, the toilet seat add-on.
CD add-on,
exactly. That had the CD add-on, which a few more games came out for. But you know, I think that the Jaguar's problem where the 3DO excelled, the 3DO had all, you know, the full motion video, where the Jaguar, obviously the games were on cartridges, so they're probably limited to, you know, 4 to 8 megabytes, something like that. So not a huge amount of actual, you know, data they can get on there. So you probably couldn't have got all of the textures which you could have got on the 3DO. And I think, I mean, a quick question really to put it out there is, would the Atari Jaguar have been a more successful machine if it came out with a CD drive in the first instance?
Yeah, I mean, I think none of these really had a chance against the PlayStation. I'm not sure what they really could have done with the resources the companies had. But the 3DO, I mean, obviously it had that advantage over the Jaguar that it was just a CD console, so it had that. Well, there's lots of exclusive games that have never appeared really anywhere else. Like, you know, Twisted is a fun game show type game that's great in multiplayer, kind of, you know, ahead of its time, almost like, you know, Mario Party before Mario Party, really. You got a really good version of FIFA, like the first sort of 3D version of FIFA.
Yeah.
It's a, you know, a great, you know, a really important leap in terms of how FIFA evolved. You've got Blade Force, which is a cool 3D helicopter game. Deadless Encounter, which is FMV with 3D sections. Tons of really cool Starfighter 3000, which is a really cool flight sim, action flight sim, sci-fi flight sim. Star Control, which is a strategy game. Just lots of really, and it's got some 2D sort of games that were ported from other consoles. Like there's Cannon Fodder for the Atari Jaguar, which is pretty good version. You know, So yeah, Samurai Showdown is even on there, which is a really good version as well. So it did get, I would say a pretty decent library of a couple of hundred games. And if you're going to choose between that and a Jaguar, I'd probably tell you to get a 3DO. Again, they're not too cheap, but yeah.
A 3DO, 10 times. 10 times, well, I wouldn't say it's 10 times, but it's twice as good. That'd be my opinion. So. Yeah.
The only thing it hasn't got is like a good version of Doom, but you can. How many places can you play Doom now? The original, so it's not a deal breaker. Yeah.
No, exactly. Now the next one I want to bring up is the CDi. Now, Trev, I never owned a CDi. Did you ever own a CDi?
No, it never really interested me, and I think we can probably not go into huge amounts of depth with this one, but it was so limited, really, in terms of hardware and its library that there's not much to really no appeal, really. I mean, there's a lot of FMV games on it. You can't really pin down a game that you can say, at least a Jaguar, you can say Doom and Tempest 3000, Alien versus Predator. The 3DO, you've got Need for Speed and FIFA, and there's a bunch of other exclusive 3D games. The CDi, I mean, there was one FMV game called Burn Cycle, which is supposed to be good. But yeah, I mean, at best, it's got some ports of 16-bit games like Micro Machines and things like that, which actually don't run that great versus the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo versions.
I think with the CDi, they didn't set out for it to be, this is going to be a games console that's going to, beat all the others. It was actually an interactive, educational resource that was sort of
it's an infotainment, device.
Infotainment, really, so you could watch films on there, you could play CDs, have it under the TV,
use an encyclopedia thing on it, and
exactly. So maybe they saw the future a little bit with, more interactive. Everyone's got a smart TV, and maybe it's the predecessor of that to a very small extent. But of course, CD. Everyone always thought, those rubbish Zelda games, those rubbish Nintendo games that came out for one reason or another, which I'm sure has been well documented online. But
but it's got a decent sized library, but there's nothing that really jumps out. I mean, I know you're a big fan of The Flowers of Robert Mapplethorpe. That's obviously a massive CDi game. But apart from that, it's just things like ports of Tetris and, like I say, Micro Machines, and it didn't really have any.
They had a good tennis game, didn't they? Davis Cup, or I think it was,
or Davis Cup or international tennis. That was bundled with it a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think a little bit later in the day they had the original one, and then another version of the CDi came out, and that was more a console shape, where the original one looked like a sort of a component to go, so it will look perfect next to your amp or your CD player or your cassette deck or something. So
exactly,
they did bring one out which had a controller with it. And that was, I don't think that ever really sort of changed the tide of them, but it was a little bit of a...
The original controller was awful. I mean, I would probably say that a direct kind of competitor to it, because I think the CDi came out sort of before the 3DO and the Jaguar by a year or two. It's really the Commodore CDTV, but I'd actually argue that the CDTV is better. At least it's also an Amiga 500, and you've got a ton of stuff you can do with an Amiga 500. So
100%, yeah. I'd love to get a CD TV. That was and I think that looked 10 times better. And of course, you could get a black disc drive for that, and you can play all the games that you play on your Amiga 500. And then if you wanted to look at encyclopedias on your TV, you could do that also. So
it had. I mean, I guess we'll talk about it a bit now, but the CDTV was basically an Amiga 500, a consoleized Amiga 500 that was again designed to be like an infotainment device, but it was just an Amiga 500 in a cool looking black hi-fi separate looking case. And there was some kind of exclusive, quote unquote exclusive, because you could probably run these on any Amiga that had a CD drive. I think you could really. But there was some encyclopedia games. There was some infotainment stuff as well. There were some like ports of just regular Amiga 500 games to CD as well. Like I think Lemmings and Xenon 2 and SimCity and things like that had some CD versions of games. Nothing particularly, mind blowing, but kind of cool because some of them have a CD soundtrack as opposed to just the regular Amiga sound. But the big advantage was I think you got like a keyboard and a mouse with it. I think it was fairly straightforward to sort of basically get it into the workbench desktop, and then you could get a floppy drive. I think you could get a bundle that included that. And obviously the keyboard and the mouse, and you could basically just run your Amiga 500 games. And God, I mean, that's one of the greatest gaming platforms ever is the Amiga. It's probably our favorite. And we talk about it constantly on this show. So, you can't throw, some of those all-time classic Amiga game. You can't, there's no second option with those other systems we've talked about. You're in those ecosystems of just the Jaguar and just the 3DO. Whereas the CDTV, you've got it's an Amiga, so you've got Sensible World of Soccer, you've got Frontier Elite 2, you've got Lemmings, you've got SimCity, you've got Cannon Fodder, you've got all those incredible Amiga games spanning 10, 15. Well, they're still making them to this day. So they're very expensive, so it'd be difficult to pick one up, and they don't come up very often because I think it was a huge flop, more so than probably the CDi and the CDi managed to sort of go on and keep on life support for several years. I think even the Jaguar had a couple of years, and the 3DO, but I think the CDTV, I'm not sure it lasted a year. And you could probably throw in the CD32 in there as well, which I do have a CD32. They're a bit easier to get hold of than a CDTV. Probably not as cool in a weird way, even though the CDTV is an Amiga 500 in a consoleized case. The CD32 is an Amiga 1200, basically, in a consoleized shell.
So the CD32 was I think it was 10 times more successful than the CDTV, but that's not really saying a lot.
No, exactly.
And I think when the CD30, I'm getting confused now. The CD32 came out. It was this is a console, but it was still just an Amiga, a base Amiga 1200, and everyone I think could 100% see the route of the way things were going, and that was towards 3D games, the PlayStation. What it was Nintendo was going to do, the Sega Saturn. That was the route people wanted to go. They wanted to play 3D arcade games at home, and then the CD32. Unfortunately, you couldn't do that, and it was just basically an Amiga 1200, but with a CD drive. So it didn't quite, cut the mustard really.
Yeah. Still, I'll say it's still, if you're an Amiga fan, it's definitely worth owning. But at the time, it was even in terms of its hardware capabilities, like the Jaguar put it to shame. Really, it couldn't do even what in terms of 3D, what a Jaguar could do. You couldn't really get a version of Doom running on it in those days. That would be to the level that a Jaguar could do Doom. But in the end of the day, it was just a lot. There was actually a decent sized library of sort of quote unquote exclusive CD32 games. I'm pretty sure all of those would run on an Amiga 1200 with a CD drive. But a lot of those were just ports of disc-based Amiga games, like again, Cannon Fodder, Lemmings, Frontier Elite 2, Bubba and Sticks. There's nothing wrong with that as such, but you're not really going to, if you've already got an Amiga, you're not really going to drop everything to get one, to get a version with a few more colors perhaps, or if you've got an Amiga 1200, there wasn't really any reason to get a CD32. But it does have the advantage, like the CDTV, of being an Amiga. So you can turn it into and use it as an Amiga. And nowadays, a lot of people have made a lot of compilations of Amiga games that you can burn to a disc and run on it, which is kind of cool. So it's actually a bit better use now. And it's a little bit easier to upgrade it and expand it than it was back in the day. There were modules you could plug into the back of it that literally turned it into an Amiga 1200. There's more options for that now. So I think it's a worthwhile. We're Amiga fans, so to us it is a kind of a cool thing. But yeah, it's weirdly hardware-wise, it was a lot worse off than some of the 3DO and like 3DO and the Jaguar, better than the CDi. But yeah, it was kind of just the same fate as the CDTV, although it did last a little bit longer, and I think it's probably more worthwhile having these days. And we can jump from there to handhelds, because obviously there was a whole bundle of them in the 90s. Now, a couple that I personally owned that I was very fond of, and are technically quote-unquote failures, the one you probably could say really was, is the Game Gear and the Atari Lynx. So have you got any thoughts on those in terms of their relative success or lack thereof?
I mean, I think they were both overshadowed by the Game Boy. Obviously, that was the market leader. But if you think, I mean, the Game Gear obviously did better than the Atari Lynx. And
it did, yeah.
I think the problem with the Atari Lynx, it just didn't have the games. It didn't have the all of the sort of the big sort of franchises like the Game Gear had Streets of Rage. It had Sonic the Hedgehog 1, 2, Sonic Chaos, and then loads of other games were sort of ported from the Master System, ported from the Mega Drive, and where the Atari Lynx sort of kind of felt like it had. I don't know, the games weren't quite as good, or they weren't. They didn't have the same sort of characters with them or marketing. But I mean, famously, of the three, the Atari Lynx was clearly the most powerful of the three machines, and a lot of sort of similar architecture to the Amiga. So from that point of view, I would say, actually, it was good, but it wasn't really, sort of taken advantage of. I think, and I would still get, if I had an option today, I would get a Game Gear, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I would say the Game Gear was much better, and in terms of like the library, in its heyday, the Game Gear wasn't that far behind the Game Boy. I mean, when it really tailed off, sort of 95, 96, that's really when the Game Boy pulled ahead. It's missing some things like, Contra and, Castlevania and some of those Konami series and things like that, and some of the Capcom series that the Game Boy did get. It doesn't really have anything of that kind, but yeah, compared to the Lynx, you've got Mortal Kombat and Sonic the Hedgehog and Streets of Rage and all those amazing series. Sonic had a couple of exclusive games that didn't come out on anything else on the Game Gear, and obviously it had a color screen. And we talked about the Game Gear before separately. I mean, that's the big Achilles heel, and it is. Personally, that didn't really bother me when I had a Game Gear because I played it most of the time at home. It was like my main console for periods of time. So I really enjoyed it. But the Lynx I also had, and I was very fond of as well. But yeah, you would really struggle. I mean, it had about 70 or 80 games in the end versus the Game Gear having like 300-ish, I think, plus.
And then also,
and it was a very limited library.
You could put Master System games into it with the adapters, and then
exactly.
You could watch TV on it. There was sort of loads of sort of scope to it, and Sega was a much sort of bigger brand than Atari at the time. It still is. So from that point of view, I mean, I would say that the Game Gear, it wasn't as successful as the Game Boy, but it was certainly successful in its own right, and probably.
Yeah, but I was.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but very similar to the PSP, the sort of position the PSP would have later on. Absolutely destroyed by the DS, but it was still, when people say, the PSP failed, because the DS sold it, but the DS was like an insanely successful console. But the PSP did well, it sold like 80 odd million units, which is like not that the same as what the PS3 and the Xbox 360 sold, and had tons of really good games. The Game Gear had all those Sega franchises, like Space Harrier and Outrun and Wonder Boy, we've already talked about Streets of Rage and stuff. stuff that you Shinobi, stuff that you couldn't get, and there were good versions of those games that made the Game Gear worth getting to get those games. The Lynx, yeah, I mean, you've got probably there's some good ports of Atari arcade machines like Road Blasters and Gauntlet and things like that. Personally, some games I used to really enjoy on the Lynx was Blue Lightning, which was like Afterburner, and really impressive sort of sprite scaling. A lot of slow paced Afterburner. Ninja Gaiden 3, which was a port of Ninja Gaiden 3 on the NES, which is kind of weird, but that's a really good platforming action platforming game. There's not really many of them on the Lynx. There was Batman Returns that they really pushed hard as a game that was bundled with the Lynx, and it was actually pretty crap. Basically just to cash in on the film, which is probably a good idea from a marketing perspective, really, but the game wasn't that good. When you got things like Scrapyard Dog and really like they look like Atari 7800, games in terms of the marketing and like the and the design and everything, and like Nintendo and Sega were light years ahead of Atari at this point in that sense. Really awesome hardware. I'm inside it. But yeah, but I'm reluctant to say it's kind of worthless or an utter failure, because I don't think it is. I think there is enough good in there. Like
I'm looking at the list of games here, and things like APB. I remember really enjoying that. California Games was certainly good. Checkered Flag, coming out in 1991. That felt like a game that should have been out in 1985. Crystal Mines, that's just an old version of I don't know, sound very sort of negative sort of towards these, but Hard Driving, again, that was an older game. And
Rampage and Rygar was actually good. Rygar was a good version of that.
What was Ninja Gaiden like? That must have been good on there.
Well, there's actually two of them. There's Ninja Gaiden, the first game, and there's Ninja Gaiden 3. Weirdly, there's no Ninja Gaiden 2 on the Lynx. Ninja Gaiden is based on the arcade machine, which is basically a scrolling beat 'em up. So it's not like the NES game, which is more popular and famous and better, which is a platform game. But the Lynx also got Ninja Gaiden 3, and that is literally the Ninja Gaiden 3 on the NES, which is a good game, which is just in that sort of platforming, that action platform Ninja Gaiden series. That's different to the arcade. So it's literally a port of that, and it's actually quite good. It's actually probably one of my favourite platformers. That and Rygar I really like on the Lynx. Obviously, kudos to it for having the colour screen and being the first colour screen on a handheld games console. Same issues as the Game Gear with the batteries, but I mean, if you were, again, gun to your head, you had to pick between the two, I would go with the Game Gear. You kind of can segue a little bit from the handhelds into, because obviously another sort of member of that 90s handheld battle was the turbografx / PC Engine GT. So you can almost, we can kind of cover a little bit of the turbografx, which we didn't get really in the UK. We got that slightly bizarre PAL version called the turbografx, which you could get in some mail order catalogs, which played the American turbografx games. It was never an official launch. But in America, obviously, they got the TurboGrafx 16, which is the American PC Engine. And that was kind of a failure. When it was up, but it was up against like the Mega Drive or the Genesis to America and the Super Nintendo. But I'm reluctant to call that a complete failure, because in Japan the PC Engine was huge, and really gave the NES a run for its money, and has tons of amazing games, especially on the CD format. Obviously one straight away is Castlevania Rondo of Blood is absolutely amazing. Tons of great games that came on the card format, the Hue cards, as well as the CDs we've just mentioned. Yeah, obviously in America they got a very small selection of those games, which limited it, and ultimately it lost out. But yeah, definitely a console to check out is the PC Engine. Probably more the Japanese kind of side of it as opposed to the American TurboGrafx side. And the handheld is really cool. The turbografx was obviously very expensive. It still is very expensive. The first example of a handheld that could match, well, it was literally the home console, basically like a Nintendo Switch is now, except it's a separate device. You can't plug a turbografx into the TV, but it played the same games as the regular TV console. So really cool bit of tech at the time. But yeah, I don't think it kind of falls into the category of failed consoles because it's so successful. I mean, have you got any thoughts on the sort of TurboGrafx 16/PC Engine?
I mean, at the time, it was something. I think I read about it briefly in magazines, but it was something that I never had sort of access to, or I've never really sort of played it. Yeah. So from that point of view, it's kind of one of those like mythical Japanese machines, and I'm sure it was very popular in Japan, but you never got it over here to really sort of show. And I'm sure people imported them and stuff, but that wasn't the world that I was living in.
Yeah. Really, we've got a whole episode where we talk about it called TurboGrafx 101, TurboGrafx PC Engine 101 to check that out. But yeah, some amazing games, obviously blazing lasers, Soldier Blade, R-Type, lots of shmups, Alien Crush, Bonk, for platformers, even some ports of Sega games. There's a really good version of Outrun, Splatterhouse. Lots of Namco ports, Splatterhouse being one of them. Street Fighter 2 made an appearance as well. There was even some Neo Geo ports as well, like Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury. Most of the best examples of the games are on the CD platform that was the add-on to the PC Engine, but it's probably the best example of a successful add-on to a system. Might even be the most successful add-on to a system of all time. And that probably takes us to, the last of the best of the worst. And that would be the two Sega consoles we're going to touch upon. Yeah. We've already talked about the Game Gear, but yeah, the Sega Saturn and the Dreamcast. So we very recently talked about the Saturn. Talked about the Dreamcast loads, both probably the best, I would say, out of the failed consoles. So we're saying the best of the worst. I think these two collectively, we might even be able to dig out the specific one out of these two, which we think is the best. But yeah, would you agree with that? Would you say Saturn and Dreamcast, best of the worst? Yeah,
they're definitely the best of the worst. And that's quite a bad sounding, achievement, really, being like the best of the worst. But unfortunately, I think that's the reality. And Nintendo and PlayStation sort of ruled the roost at this time. And the Saturn came out, and I've spoke loads about how the Saturn is one of my favorite consoles, and I think there's loads of amazing games. I love the controller, and there's loads of things that I love about it. That it did absolutely right, but there's no doubt about it. It lost out to the PlayStation. PlayStation had more games, and then you could argue is more powerful. So then the Dreamcast came out, and and well done to Sega, because I don't think people realize how much, with the Dreamcast, they came out and they had online, they had VGA output, all the graphics look so clear and clean, and they had the memory card, so you can move data from one console to another. So there's so many innovative ideas about it, but I think it was too late, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they're both amazing consoles with brilliant libraries. Unfortunately, they were kind of hamstrung by Sega's limited resources, really, and the fact that just the PlayStation was an absolute juggernaut. We've struggled to come up with realistic ways in our Saturn episode we did recently that it could have been more successful. It might never have been able to be successful, really, against the PlayStation. I've maintained that. and that, and also the Dreamcast really was kind of doomed a little bit. What I would say in terms of the libraries, like the Dreamcast, it has an amazing library, but the only kind of knock against it right now is a lot of it is available elsewhere and it's quite easily accessible. I mean, some of my favorite games, either you can get a version of that game somewhere else, or it's just flat out got a sequel. Like Soul Calibur has got more entries in the series you can play elsewhere. Sonic Adventures appeared on multiple platforms. The first 2 games, Shenmue has been re-released recently, and it came out on the Xbox as well, not long after the Dreamcast version. There's very few games that are still, Crazy Taxi, Virtua Tennis, the NBA 2K and NFL 2K games, Ready to Rumble, Marvel vs. Capcom, all of these games which, in isolation when they were coming out on the Dreamcast, and that was the only place you could play them, obviously it made the library look absolutely incredible, and it was. And I'm not taking away from that; it'll still be incredible, but you could play a lot of that stuff elsewhere now. So it kind of takes the sheen off the Dreamcast a tiny bit for me. Whereas the Saturn, a lot of that stuff is still trapped on the Saturn. I mean, I've argued just now that there are sequels to things potentially, but some of those first games in a lot of those series are very unique, like Virtua Fighter 1, House of the Dead 1. Sega Rally, the original Daytona USA, those games. There's not really any kind of... They're so Sega Saturn centric that you need to basically have a Saturn to really experience them. Even like light gun games, like Virtua Cop. But you've got things like Tomb Raider and stuff like that appeared elsewhere. But even so, it's still worth investigating the Saturn version of something like that. I'd probably slightly put the Saturn a little bit ahead. It's even got like quirky things like the port of Quake, and Duke Nukem 3D, which again are available elsewhere, but they're so unique in how they delivered those games on the Saturn. They're worth investigating. Sonic R, like I'm just reading off all these games, literally looking at my shelf because they're just so incredible. Great 2D fighters. The Dreamcast had a few of those as well, but the Saturn had a ton of them. A ton of shmups. Radiant Silvergun, obviously being the classic one. But there's others like, there's like Parodius, collection, and Gradius collection, and Raystorm, and things like Galactic Attack and things like that Dodon Pachi that are on the Saturn. Often were better to play on that than they were on if there was a PlayStation version. A lot of the 2D games, and I think obviously when you conclude the Japanese library, I think it is a lot larger than the Dreamcast library ultimately, because it did last, it did kind of get a nearly complete console cycle, didn't it? Really, it kind of went from 1994 till around 2000, I think, when its last release happened. Whereas the Dreamcast, it came and went in a couple of years, really, didn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Unfortunately. I think if I was going to name my best of the worst, and you kind of feel bad including the word worst in that, I think it would probably be the Sega Saturn. What are your final sort of thoughts on the best of the worst?
I think I agree with you there. I mean, it's a joint between the Dreamcast and the Saturn, and even to the point, I want to say the Dreamcast shouldn't even be in the conversation. But I do think the Saturn is the best of the worst from that generation of machines. And there were some things like the Jaguar was awful, the CDi was awful, the CD32 was not well thought out, the CDTV again wasn't great. I mean, we didn't really talk about the 32X, but again that wasn't great, and just a real lack of support. So, there's just loads of things. Yeah.
Well, there we go. I mean, we think out of all the quote-unquote failed consoles, we think the Saturn is probably the best one. I'm sure you guys have different opinions on that. Maybe there's some of those really obscure ones that we haven't touched upon. Maybe there's someone out there that thinks the Casio Loopy and the Apple Pippin are better than all. If that's the case, we'd love to, see your comments on our YouTube channel. On our Facebook page as well. And in fact, where can you find us in the various corners of the internet, Stu?
Oh, we are everywhere. We're all over YouTube, so search Console Shock. You can find us on any sort of podcast client, Console Shock. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook under Console Shock. So please look us up and drop us a message on there. We love to hear from you guys. And yeah, it's really good.
Cool. Right. Well, in that case, thanks for listening. As always, everybody, take care and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Take it easy, guys. Bye-bye.